Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome again. I think we'll get started. So welcome to the first webinar in our four-part SDG integration series, Understanding the Goals and Raising Ambition. Next slide, please. My name is Jessica, and I lead our Global Goals programme here at the UN Global Compact Network UK. Joining me today is Steve Kenzie, our Executive Director, and our guest speaker, Jonathan Gill. Jonathan is the Global Sustainability Director focused on strategy and corporate engagement at Unilever. His role focuses on evolving and driving forward Unilever's sustainability strategy with the Chief Sustainability Officer and supporting the Chief Executive Officer on his external engagements on sustainability. So as part of this, he leads Unilever's relationships with key global bodies, including the World Economic Forum, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and the Consumer Goods Forum. Jonathan is passionate about business being a force for good, and so we're delighted to have him with us today to speak about how a company like Unilever starts with a purpose to make sustainable living commonplace and uses a multi-stakeholder business model to tackle the social, economic and environmental challenges the world faces while growing the business. So that takes us nicely onto our agenda. So next slide, please. And this morning's webinar is all about understanding the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda. So we'll be taking a look at both global and national progress on this agenda before exploring the business case for engaging with the goals and the real need for business to start raising levels of ambition. As I mentioned, we'll be hearing from Jonathan, who will be sharing Unilever's sustainability story, and there'll be an opportunity for Q&A so you can get your questions answered. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Relics, who are supporting this series and enabling these important conversations to take place. Relics is a UK network member. It's really great to have their support, as well as highlight their fantastic SDG Resource Centre, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. So just a little bit of housekeeping for the session. This webinar is being recorded and we will share a recording afterwards. We are in webinar mode, which means that you will be unable to unmute yourself or turn your camera on, but we're really keen for your engagement. So please do use the Q&A box throughout the webinar for questions. We can get to those questions a little bit. If you have any comments or technical questions, then please use the chat box for that. And I'd really like to encourage you to use the Q&A box for questions for our speakers, and then the chat box for anything else, just so it makes it easier for us to get to all of your questions. For now, though, I think that's all from me. So I would like to pass over to Steve to formally welcome you from the network.
And just in that second, my headphones have malfunctioned, so isn't that inconvenient? So I hope you can hear me okay. All right, well, welcome. My name is Steve Kenzie, as just said, and we are here representing the UN Global Compact Network, part of the world's largest responsible business initiative, connecting UK companies and other organizations in a global movement dedicated to driving sustainable growth. There are currently over 13,000 companies around the world that are participating in the Global Compact, and another 3,500 non-business organizations, and genuinely global. Pretty much every major purchasing and sourcing country has strong representation from the Global Compact. The very essence of the Global Compact are 10 principles that are drawn from UN treaties in the areas of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. And these principles provide us with a really robust foundation as we project these universal values around the world. Next slide, please. Here at the UK network, our role is to support UK-based participants in fulfilling the commitments that they made when they joined the Global Compact. This slide is actually a little bit out of date. The shift to online working has meant significantly ramping up the volume of activity that we do, and we probably do more than 100 events per year to support our members. We have three main work streams: global goals, the team that's presenting today's project, business and human rights, and climate action. And across those three work streams, we seek to raise the ambition of our member companies and the wider business community. We seek to enable action and to shape the environment for sustainable business so that we create a world that we want to live and do business in. Next slide, please. The commitment to join the Global Compact is fairly straightforward. Your CEO needs to send a letter to the Secretary General, and that's a letter that will be in the public domain. So a public commitment to operationalize our 10 principles throughout your business activities, to report annually on the progress you're making, and to support the wider UN development agenda. If your company is not already participating, we would be delighted to have a conversation with you about that. So do get in touch. Just circling back to that third point, the wider UN development agenda, that has come to be defined by the Sustainable Development Goals, which is what's brought us together today. And I'm going to pass back to Jess now to give you an introduction to the goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sleeve. And if we could go on to the next slide, please. So these are the Sustainable Development Goals, passed in 2015, following on from the Millennium Development Goals, with 17 goals to achieve globally by 2030. So this 2030 agenda was agreed by all UN member states in 2015, after the largest consultation ever undertaken by the UN. There was literally tens of thousands of stakeholders who contributed. And you can see here the goals, they're very closely interlinked, but together the idea is that they will bring about the future we want. So fighting those inequalities, tackling climate change, and creating a better world. The goals apply to all countries. It was governments that made the commitment to them, but as you're probably aware, achieving the goals is going to require support from all members of society, and in particular, the business community. So beneath these 17 goals sit 169 targets and 232 indicators to measure progress. So let's take a closer look at one of the goals. We go on to the next slide. I've got goal 3 up there. So goal 3, good health and well-being. If you see the full text, already there's a lot more insight into what this goal is trying to address. And the full text is to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. We then dive into the targets that sit beneath it. We can see the real richness of the goal and really what it's trying to achieve. There's quite a lot of text on the screen there, so I've highlighted a few keywords just to draw your attention to, I guess, some of those main points. And I'm sure that these are things that either you and your organization, perhaps somebody else in your company is looking at addressing. So we've got there promoting mental health and well-being, reducing road traffic accidents, reducing the number of deaths and illnesses from chemicals and pollution. And there's some particular ones there: universal health coverage, supporting the research and development of vaccines, strengthening capacity of countries in the management of global health risks, which we know have been incredibly relevant over the last year. So that's just a little bit of a dive into what it looks like beneath that goal. If we could go to the next slide, I've got a picture of the SDGs up again, and we'd like to take a couple of minutes just to ask you some questions. So hopefully that poll should have launched. First question, really just keen to know who we've got in the room. So tell us about your organization type. This webinar, we're going to be focusing on the role of business in delivering the SDGs, but we know we need all actors working together. So really keen to know who's here to join us. Second question, does your work align to one or more areas addressed in the SDGs? Not a trick question. We're just really interested to know if these kind of areas, so we're looking at poverty, there's gender equality, there's things to do with the environment, climate action, things to do with supply chain. Not to know if those are relevant to you at the moment. And for those who are new to this agenda, this is, I guess, a little bit of an opportunity to look through those goals and identify if there are any issues that you're currently working on. And the last question, has that changed in the last year? So just looking at kind of where your work is aligning to those issues, has that changed in the last 12 months? Has there been greater importance placed on some of these issues, perhaps shifting importance? Maybe your priorities have moved to some of the other goals. Of course, there's no and not sure options there as well. So I can see we've got about 70% of people voting. I'll just give you another few seconds to answer those questions. Okay, and I'll close it in about 5 seconds. So if you've not answered now, now's your chance. Okay, I will end the polling and share those results. So fantastic. Looks like about 60% are joining us from the business sector, but we've also got non-profits, governments, academic, business associations, and some others there. So a great mixture of people. Fantastic. Looks like, what is that? 96% of people say that their work aligns to at least one or more areas in the SDGs. And really interesting there to see over half of you have said that there's been greater importance placed on some of these issues in the last 12 months. About another quarter who said kind of shifting priorities. So that's really interesting. We'll have a look at that slightly later. So let's take a look at the progress that's been made on the SDGs so far. And we're going to start with the global picture. We could go to the next slide, please. I guess globally, the problem is that even after 5 years, the world has not been delivering on progress towards the goals at the pace or scale that's needed. So you can see there on the screen, there's still estimated 257 years to close the economic gender gap globally. 150 million children in labour, 700 million people still in poverty, and global temperatures are on track for a 3.5-degree rise. If we could go on to the next slide, on top of that, we're now seeing the impacts of COVID-19 kind of intertwined with these long-standing social and economic inequalities. And I think COVID-19 has really highlighted the fragilities of our society and our systems. And there was a report that was produced last year by the UN called Shared Responsibility, Global Solidarity, and it said that a hard truth is that we could have been better prepared for this crisis if we'd been working more towards the SDGs. You know, the SDGs put us on track towards a world with access to universal health coverage and quality healthcare and more inclusive and sustainable economies. And it's true. I mean, you know, we're not delivering the SDGs at the scale that we need. COVID-19 has put us further back, but it's also highlighted how much more important it is that we really are advancing this agenda. And if we'd been working more on reducing poverty, there would have been a reduced impact on the most vulnerable. Or if we'd been working more on strengthening our supply chains, there wouldn't have been such a shock that we had when the pandemic hit us last year. And I think the need for greater ambition to deliver on the SDGs is becoming really clear. So that's the global picture, but let's have a look at what's happening in the UK. If we could go to the next slide. In 2018, UK SSD conducted a study that found of the 143 relevant targets to the UK, we're only making good progress on 24% of those. And the government did a voluntary national review of progress in 2019, and they took an in-depth look at each SDG and outlined next steps. And I should say that you can find both these resources and some of the other things that we'll be sharing all on our website. Next slide, please. Just, I guess, a little bit of an updated snapshot. Last year in July, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network prepared this kind of picture of progress for each country. So it's not very clear, I guess it's quite small, but you can see along the top, this is for the UK, the goals which have major or significant challenges still, and those are in red and orange. And in yellow, challenges remain. So you can see there's actually challenges across all of the SDGs at the moment in the UK. And at the bottom, where all of the little arrows are, that's looking at the trends. So the green arrows are where we are on track, or at least maintaining SDG achievement. The yellow arrows were moderately improving. And then there's orange stagnating, or even red there for goal 10, where we're decreasing. So I guess I asked in the poll whether your focus or priorities have changed in the last year. And the reason being is that I think this agenda has grown in importance and criticality even over the last 12 months. Now, we've already looked at the impacts of COVID, and we know of the long-term effects that that's going to happen. But we're also starting to feel the impacts of some of the other changes that are happening even in our country. So we've got things like Brexit, we've got the Black Lives Matter campaign, both of which are further highlighting the need to ensure that any of our recovery and our Build Back Better plans meet the SDGs and level up on the inequalities across the country. We're going to the next slide. That's the reason why we coordinated a letter along with 150 other business leaders calling on the UK government to align their recovery strategies with the SDGs. And you can read a copy of the government's response on our website. Hopefully in the coming months, we're also going to see the government release their new departmental plans for implementing the goals. Just before I hand over to Steve, I'd like to do one last slide, and that's looking at locally what's happening on this agenda. So I've got just a few pictures there of some of the work, some of the networks that are going on in various different cities and regions across the UK to really integrate the goals into local policy decisions and recovery plans. Taken together, I guess that's a very brief look at global, national and local progress on the SDGs so far. But I guess also a snapshot into the huge number of actors that are already engaging in this agenda. So Steve, I'm going to hand over to you here to talk a little bit more about why business in particular should be engaging in this agenda.
Thanks, Jess. Next slide and next slide, please. So here's a little photo montage that I think raises many of the key reasons why business need to be thinking about this agenda. And a lot of it hinges around the somewhat philosophical question of is it mandatory or voluntary? But let me start with the picture in the top left, and you'll notice the Prime Minister is wearing a lapel pin, not unlike mine. And if you could see that, it's the SDG rings. And so if you were in any doubt about the national government's awareness of this agenda, you should not be. You know, it was signed by the Cameron government, but the current government are well aware of the SDGs. These goals have already influenced government policy, and they will continue to do so into the future. They are integral to many department plans. You need to be aware of this agenda in order to anticipate upcoming policy that may well affect your business. The next image is a picture of Mark Carney, and the headline is referring to the TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which is currently a voluntary initiative strongly encouraging companies to report transparently on their exposure to climate risk. And he's effectively saying it's voluntary for now, but if you don't act, it won't be voluntary for long. And the next image is just reinforcing that point. Investors are more and more demanding transparent disclosures around climate risks of companies. Moving along, the headline that Uber stripped of their London license to operate due to lack of corporate responsibility. For many of us on this call, it's headlines like this are a dream come true. It's job security indefinitely. Here's a classic case of a company, I think, putting what is often described as non-financial issues in a box and not taking it seriously because it's non-financial until it becomes financial, and then they're wishing they take it more seriously all along. And so this is a really important example. The lack of corporate responsibility that they're talking about in this story, for the most part, sits within Goal 8 around decent work in the SDGs. And had the company taken their responsibilities there more seriously, had they voluntarily engaged with the goals more to fulfill some of the targets, they might have avoided this situation. The next slide is the good people of the Extinction Rebellion taking to the streets in London, demanding change. And I think that speaks to a big silent majority in this country and around the world that want change. The global goals express really quite clearly the future we want. And most of the incidents over the past couple of years, so before the pandemic struck, people were taking to the streets in Chile, in Lebanon, in Hong Kong, in London, all around the world. And what a common thread behind all of these protests was the SDGs, whether they knew it or not. Everything that was being protested was addressed in the goals. And so I think this, again, is a really clear indicator that companies need to be plugged into the to the zeitgeist, that these goals represent the future we want. If your business is not already aligned to this agenda, you're out of step with society, and that's not a comfortable place, I think, for any business to be. The final slide, MEPs is backing a law to hold firms to account for environment and human rights abuses. So kind of bringing us back full circle, we should expect ever increasing policy interventions requiring companies to align themselves with the goals. Whether or not it's actually called aligning with the goals, the environmental and human impacts that the MEPs are talking about are addressed in the goals. The goals provide a tremendously useful framework around which companies can assess their sustainability performance. And we're seeing more and more investors taking that view and using the SDGs as a key consideration as they integrate ESG into their investment plans. Next slide, please. Shortly after the goals were launched, the Business and Sustainable Development Commission was launched to take a really objective look at the potential impact of the goals. And what they came away with was an estimate that embracing the goals could generate up to $12 trillion of new business value a year. And in fact, that headline was only looking at actually 3 key sectors. The potential is much greater. This is a tremendously business-friendly agenda with tremendous opportunity. Next slide, please. Looking at it from a macro level, a better educated and more productive workforce is good for business. Economic and political stability, good for business. More fair and just societies, climate resilience, this is all good for business. This is a very pro-business agenda at the macro level. Next slide, please. It's also at the micro level. Aligning with the SDGs, making your business more sustainable, makes your business more attractive for investors and for customers. It improves your management of your supply chain. It makes you more attractive in the market for public procurement, public investment. A really key consideration, it improves competitiveness in hiring. More and more, the best and the brightest want to work for companies that are doing more than just making rich people richer. They want to have a positive impact on the world to get satisfaction from their work life. And this is a really key consideration for the future of your enterprise, that you be able to hire the best people. They want to see that your company is doing something positive in the world. And that comes back to that social license to operate and public opinion, essential to a successful business. Next slide, please. I think I'm with that, handing over to Jonathan to tell us a little bit more about the Unilever journey, a company that is widely recognized as a true leader in this space. And we're really delighted to have you with us, Jonathan. Over to you.
Thanks, Steve, for having me and for those kind words. Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Although it'd be nice to be doing this in person, but that's where we are. I work for Unilever, and I'm in what we call our global sustainability team. Basically, a central group that helps steer the sustainability agenda within Unilever and embed it into the business as much as possible. I think I've got about 15 minutes, and I'm going to go through our engagement with the Sustainable Development Goals and how they've influenced Unilever, both concretely, but also a little bit philosophically as well, because I think there's been a huge shift over the last 5 years, and I think you can hone that down. You can hone in some of that change to the SDGs. So if we go to the next slide, please. So first, go back to 2015, in fact, probably 2014, 2013. And I can't take any credit for this because I only joined Unilever in 2015. But we've been close to the goals since before they existed. Our previous CEO, Paul Polman, was a member of the UN Secretary General's high-level panel that helped develop the SDGs. He was the private sector representative. And basically his view was that business could be a force for good, and that the development agenda will be held back if business isn't the role of business and the role of the economy isn't recognised. And I think this was quite a big pivot from the MDGs, and it was one that certainly I think made the SDGs something that is one, more achievable, and secondly, as more embraced, more widely embraced. So if we go to the next slide, please. And just one example of that. So SDG 6, water, sanitation and hygiene. This one's close to my heart because this is one that I worked on quite a lot when I first joined Unilever in 2015. So clean water, washing your hands, access to toilets and access to functioning and clean toilets as well. That's kind of what SDG 6 is all about. Unilever is, we've got 400 odd brands within the business, and we operate in about almost every country in the world. Not quite everyone, but almost. One of the brands is Lifebuoy soap, which actually started in the UK, and it's the biggest soap brand in the world. So it's not a massive, well-known brand in the UK, but it's very well known across the world. And the simple piece of logic on this is that the more people who wash their hands and the more people who have access to soap, the healthier they will be. And that is a core link to SDG 6. So the more that Unilever can get soap into people's hands and teach them how to use them, because there's a big gap between supply and also use, the more the better we will do in terms of achieving SDG 6. And in 2015, when the goals were announced, the 17 goals, the 169 targets, and the 231, I scribbled that down, indicators. We worked really hard with civil society to identify an indicator around hand washing with soap, because washing your hands without soap it doesn't really cut the mustard. You have to wash it with soap. So ourselves, with organizations like WaterAid and UNICEF, advocated really strongly to make sure that was one of the indicators, and we were fortunate enough to succeed. And we were very pleased with that, because hand washing with soap is kind of is often the forgotten part of the wash party. So it was a great achievement, and this is a win-win. So the more that part of our business grows, the better for individuals, and vice versa. And that's one way how the SDGs is really kind of embracing the private sector, whereas the MDGs was a little bit more focused on just kind of how philanthropy can drive change. If we could go to the next slide, please. So a lot's happened since 2015, but there's been one real tidal shift, and hopefully this is all recognised by people on the call. But sustainable business is mainstream. Shifted from being seen as a kind of costly add-on to being an integral part of business, for all the reasons that Steve talked about. I was doing a piece of work yesterday, and some of the lazy assumptions are that investors don't care about sustainability. Yeah, they do. They do, because they recognise that it's key to the long-term success of a business. And most, huge proportion of investors are pension funds, and they have to create returns every year to be able to pay for the pensions of many of the people we know. So it's all about driving value over the long term. There's been a huge rise in ESG investing, and demands from investors for ESG information is only increasing, because there's a real realization of the alignment of interests, that good returns to shareholders are only achieved by looking after the wider stakeholders that you serve. There was a nice example from BlackRock, where 20% of investors said the pandemic would accelerate their sustainable investing allocations, and there's lots of other data that's showing this, and actually way more than 20%. So there's a clear reaction to market forces, but also to the external policy agenda. And I don't think it's kind of either or. I think these are combined forces. So the SDGs in 2015, the Paris Agreement on climate change, the upcoming COP 26 in Glasgow, and the COP 15 also on nature. All of these things are really shifting raising the profile of the agenda. So the policy context has moved, and businesses need to operate within this new framework. So as the wider system changes, businesses within it realize they need to change as well. If we could go to the next slide, please. The other piece is that stakeholders are demanding it. So you've kind of got, you've got a realization that for the long-term success of business, you need to think more broadly. You've got the policy environment changing with the SDGs and Paris. And on top of that, you've got the wider stakeholders who are expecting businesses to change. So we've long believed that business that thrive in the future will be those that are driven by purpose for the benefit of many stakeholders, from consumers to customers to people, society, the planet, and our shareholders. And that's why we're committed to a multi-stakeholder model at the heart of our business. And there's some very clear kind of reasons for that. So communities, 86% expect CEOs to publicly speak out on social challenges. Shareholders, 60% of ESG funds outperform the wider market. Again, there's other data on that, which is even higher. Employees, and Steve mentioned this earlier, we have purpose-driven companies have 40% higher levels of workforce retention than their competitors. Unilever's the #1 graduate employer in 52 of 54 of our markets. We're a soup and soap company. We're not a glamorous kind of big tech or anything like that. So, you can see why putting sustainability at the heart really helps attract the best talent. And then lastly, consumers, they're 4 times more likely to purchase from purpose-driven companies. And there's a great study from Kantar, which looked at sort of purpose-driven brands and their performance. And over 12 years, and a lot of brands, the outperformance was clear. I think nearing on double in terms of growth. Then, of course, the NGOs community, they're pushing for more transformative ways of thinking about the role of business in society and the economy. And really, actually, and we're seeing this more and more, there's a collective challenge of some of the sort of economic paradigms that have ruled business behavior for the last few decades, and addressing some of those kind of core fundamentals that prevent more sustainable business from flourishing. I noticed someone on the chat had just caught my eye, mentioned the Better Business Act, and there's lots of things like this happening. There's that in the UK. There's something in the Netherlands happening as well. There's questions being raised about actually the fundamentals that drive business, which and from my perspective, sorry, just a slight tangent, these things are really important because you can commit to driving lots of change within your business, but actually you need the whole kind of system to change with you, because, and this is a slightly a well-used quote, but I think it's, you can't be a sustainable business in an unsustainable economy. So you need to think about those wider shifts as well. And then if we go to the next slide, please. So about a month ago, we launched the Unilever Compass, which is some of you may know about the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. That was 2010 to 2020. We're now in 2021, and we've launched the Compass. This is our kind of new integrated sustainable business strategy. So it's all in one place. I've only shown you the sustainability part here because I think that was the piece that's most relevant, but it's really looking at the areas that it's really highlighting the areas that we need to address to make our business purpose-led and future fit. Sorry, just lost my place for a second. And those 3 parts are built up of improving the health of the planet, with commitments spanning from net zero operations by 2030 to protecting and regenerating nature, the land we use, while supporting smallholder farmers. You'll also be, hopefully, you'll also be familiar with some of the plastic commitments we set, because they started out a couple of years ago. Second one is improving the health and well-being of people. This will be really driven by the brands and products that we produce. So from our F&R division in their future food strategy, and through beauty and personal care through the positive beauty strategy. And this is things like Dove self-esteem program, Lifebuoy hand washing program, really ramping up our efforts in these areas to improve the health and well-being of over 1 billion people. And then contributing to a fairer and more socially inclusive world. This probably got the most headlines. Our commitment to a living wage across the value chain. We already do it in our business, but actually going well beyond our own kind of metaphorical four walls. And then there's also commitments here on diversity and inclusion within our own workforce, because we know that more diverse teams drive better performance. And then also looking at young people, the future. And, we know that young people have probably been, well, everyone's had a tough time in the last year or so, but young people potentially have the longer term impact. So we're investing to address that. And the reason why I've kind of shared this in the context of the SDGs is because I think if you looked at most sustainability programs or corporate responsibility programs in kind of 2013, 2014, they would be addressing certain issues and they would be semi-attached to the business. Some of them would be core, some of them may not be, and it would still have that slight feel of kind of a nice thing to do. I think the SDGs really ramped home the challenge we've got and the Paris Agreement ramped home the challenges that we've got collectively, and also the opportunity for business to be part of the solution, and also for businesses to succeed in sort of traditional business kind of way, whilst tackling some of these problems. And over the last 5 years, you've seen more and more businesses really ramp up their efforts. Our stated goal is to be the global leader in sustainable business, and it's getting harder to keep that mantle because the pressure is ramping up. And I do believe the SDGs was kind of one of the key kind of tripping points that sort of pushed more businesses into this direction. And I think that we wouldn't, Unilever, would we have got to the place where we have one integrated sustainable business strategy? I'd like to think we would, but I think if the SDGs weren't there, then I'm not convinced that the wider kind of change would be happening. If we go to the next slide, please. As well as talking about kind of commitments and things, I also want to show how we drive change. And again, this is influenced from the SDGs. So we ensure our own house is in order by being the change we want to see in others, and also making sure that we're credible and legitimate. We utilize the full scale of Unilever to influence the business practices and policies of those in our value chain. So again, outside the metaphorical four walls. We leverage our purposeful brands through a combination of marketing, communications, and also impact programs and partnerships. And then we work at the systems level to really drive change in wider society, because again, to use the well used quote, you can't be a sustainable business in an unsustainable economy. And one just prime example of that is to get to our net zero by 2039 commitment. Because of our scope 3 emissions, they're in people's homes, people washing their clothes with fossil fuel power washing machines. We can't have a direct influence on that, so we need to make efforts to change the energy grid. Sure, we won't change everything, we won't be responsible for that change in its entirety, but we will be there driving that change forward. And the SDGs are key here. They kind of provide the global sort of guidance on what business should be tackling. So if there's a an issue that we identify as material to our business, the first thing that we probably look at is, okay, what does the SDGs say about this? You know, what's the global plan, you know, saying that we should be thinking about it in terms of tackling it. And then if we go to the next slide, please. And then just to bring things to life a little bit, as with the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, the compass and sustainability commitments depend on that wider advocacy and partnerships work, because we can't achieve much on our own. Yeah, we can achieve a lot with others. So we're really making efforts to create the enabling environment where Unilever can thrive. So this is high-level advocacy. So you know, a prime example of that was Paul's involvement in the SDGs back in sort of 2014, 2015. Working with other like-minded companies like WBCSD, through platforms like WBCSD, sorry, to sort of drive the wider change that we need. Again, a nice example there is on climate. To be able to achieve net zero, we need to have full traceability and full understanding of the carbon impact of our sourcing. And you could do that as an individual business, but actually it'd make much more sense to do it as an industry, or even beyond the industry, and WBCSD are driving things like that. And then strategic partnerships with customers, you know, because again, if this stuff doesn't land with the people who buy and use our products, then there's value in it, sure, but actually there is, as we've seen from the earlier data, there's people, you and I, the shoppers in the supermarket, are asking for more of this, and have more expectations that the companies will do this. And so we need to show that we're doing this, and we need to tell that story. And when we do it with a customer like a Walmart or an Amazon or a Sainsbury's or a Tesco, then it's much more powerful. And in fact, more of those customers are kind of demanding it of us as well. So it's a two-way street. But then also new business models. So instead of just thinking about the kind of standard ways of working, we work with different governments, we work with different NGOs, and one example is with FCDO, or previously DFID, now FCDO. We've got an incubator program called Transform, which scales new business models to help contribute to more sustainable living. So how do we get more goods linked to water, sanitation, and hygiene, for example, in the last mile in communities that wouldn't normally have access to them? That's good for them, and it's good for us, and it's good for the country as well. And all of this is really underpinned by continuous and really, actually shouldn't underestimate this, relationship building and with key stakeholders, and that's from the UN Global Compact, UN Foundation, other UN agencies, to government ministers, to foundations, to NGOs, to other businesses, to really understand the shared agenda that we're working on and identify where we can have the most impact. So just going to wrap up now, but from a Unilever perspective, the SDGs have had a big impact on us in terms of very practical support in identifying what we should be looking at and how we should be contributing to the challenges the world faces. Because realistically, the SDGs are the kind of the global plan, or the global to-do list, as I've heard them called. And then there's a sort of more philosophical impact, I think, on Unilever, but also on business more generally, in really shifting businesses from thinking about seeing these things as kind of government problem or not our problem, to a real risk we need to manage and a real opportunity for business growth. So thanks for taking the time. I think I'm a minute over, which hopefully I'm not on the naughty step for. But yeah, look forward to the kind of questions or discussion now.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. And thank you to our engaged audience for so many questions. Before we get stuck into that, though, I would like to just exercise my moderator's privilege, because I have a question that's been I've had for a while and haven't had a chance to ask. Unilever was quite famously the target of a hostile takeover a couple of years ago, and I think your approach to sustainability, because it was in such a contrast to the company that was seeking to take you over, featured quite centrally in that. Are you able to comment? I'm interested in perhaps if there's been any lasting impact from that experience. Did that sort of validate the commitment to sustainability? It kind of looks like that. And was there a doubling down, or was it a cause for maybe second thoughts because it had led to that situation, perhaps? And maybe my superficial knowledge of the situation is reflected there. But could you share anything about that? Maybe why you thought it happened and any impact from it?
So I think the simple answer is that when you're committed to the journey towards being a sustainable business, as Unilever has been for, at that point, well, the USLP started in 2010, but the commitment was, long time lasting before then. I think it's very hard to kind of basically, to say, to sort of, for one event to kind of fundamentally challenge what a business is kind of trying to do. And I think when there's the culture and the purpose of an organization is so ingrained, then it doesn't rock things. For sure, you probably have a bit of a question, but actually what it did for Unilever was it just made us realize that we have to really prove that this drives performance. We have to really show that this isn't a nice thing that we're doing. It's actually about ensuring that we as a business are delivering great performance across the board. So we have within the compass, we've committed to a multi-stakeholder business model, and there's some kind of interpretation that you kind of means you deprioritize certain stakeholders. It's not at all. It's actually saying that we see alignment in the interests of all stakeholders when you look at it from a multi-year view. For example, if you took climate, we could not fund the transition to be net zero and save a bit of money this year, but very quickly we'd be facing fairly significant challenges from lots of different stakeholders, from our including the investors, and we would start seeing increased costs because as the energy transition takes place, and then we'd have to be scrambling and kind of investing more money to kind of catch up with what others are doing. And so I think for us, it's all about, being crystal clear on the business case, being crystal clear on how it's driving the performance for the business, and also making sure that we are picking the right things to focus on. So for us, it was a kind of, I would say that it's just sharpened our approach. Probably is the best simple one.
Well, I saw a tweet from Paul Pullman a couple of weeks ago showing the relative performance of Unilever and its commitment to sustainability versus the company that had tried to take them over, and it looks like you've clearly made the case for performance around this. Now, my next question, and I'm really fortunate in that Anthony Mully in the chat has asked something similar, so I can pass on the credit for this, but I was struck by the choice of the two retailers that you indicated as your strategic partners, as being a couple of companies that are often put forward as examples of companies that have some real problems with their corporate responsibility. Certainly in terms of worker welfare, I suppose. Anthony's question, and I'm really interested in this, is just how have you effectively engaged with retailers, and what's involved in that strategic partnership? What sort of leverage do you have with a couple of giants like that, who have their own cultures? It must be very challenging to be engaging with them around sustainability.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at the partners that you work with, there's multiple different dimensions. I think you've got to identify what's the do you have a shared ambition, and is ultimately the first question you've got to ask. And I think we do. Do you have a shared ambition? Do you have a shared kind of is the motivation the same? Yes, I think it is. Shared ambition, shared motivation, and then what is it you're going to actually go and do together? So and if you've got those first two box ticked, then you can work on the specifics on what you're going to go and do. And every business in the world has different challenges that they're trying to address. I think if there's a commitment to addressing them, then I think you think that's legitimate, then I think that it's better to work with people than not. Take Facebook, for example. We've spent years, they've got well-documented challenges. We've spent years working with them, and it's better to work from the inside to drive change than just to kind of walk off, basically, and throw eggs from the outside. And that's the same whether it's and we're the same. So we have active conversations with many NGOs who have challenges to some of what we do, and think we should be moving faster on certain things. And so actually having that conversation, two-way conversation, to understand what people are trying to do, how you're trying to do it, and find the solutions together, is usually the best approach to solving these problems, rather than kind of not engaging. Is generally our take on the best approach.
Now, firstly, thanks for that. If there's a question that you like the looks of, let me know and we'll just go straight to it. A lot of the questions are a little more targeted at Global Compact, so I've gone down the list a little bit, and I'm just thinking now, to build on that question about civil society engagement. Jane Saywell has asked if you could just to maybe describe a little bit more what your civil society engagement looks like, and what form does that engagement take?
Oh gosh. We know the compass sets out our priorities in terms of sustainability and embedding that into the business. Each of those areas is owned by a executive within the business. So Mark Engel, our Chief Supply Chain Officer, he leads on climate, for example. Lena Nair, our Head of HR, leads on youth. Alan leads on plastics to a certain extent, alongside Richard Slater, our Head of R&D. And they own the target, the commitment, and the delivery. And they know full well that they can't do any of these things without working with partners, business, government, civil society. And so, they basically engage with the right members of with civil society, other companies, governments, to really understand who and how who we should be working with and how we should be working with them. And obviously there's teams below them who also work on it as well. But those top to top relationships, they really kind of spend time on. because we know that the more we invest in those, the more we understand the real issues, and the more we can get ahead of the challenges and the opportunities that may well appear. Let me take plastic, for example. Richard Slater, our head of R&D, works closely with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, because we know that working with them is going to help us accelerate, deliver our commitments on plastic. So it's from the top. It's very clear ownership, very clear delivery, very open two-way conversations. We have a shared area of interest, and we look at how we can support one another to deliver them. And it's not always friendly.
There's another great question from Jane regarding your stakeholder model. But I think rather than asking more generally, I like the question from Lee Broadhurst that's more specifically about a very specific group of stakeholders, and that being employees. So he asks, how do you engage and raise awareness amongst your people about contributing to the goals, and how do you make it a part of the culture, I suppose?
Yeah,
and I recognize you've only got a couple minutes, so I'll this is probably the last one.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. I think when they were launched in 2015, there was a huge internal kind of awareness raising campaign of the goals, both across the business, basically, so people understood what they were. And I would say, whenever we engage at UNGA Week in New York, I think they're always referenced. But also, to a certain extent, they're there. If you look at our annual report, we include the goals. If you see a presentation on how the work Lifebuoy are doing, they'll mention the goals. It's the context that we kind of operate in to a certain extent, and so a lot of teams just default understand them and engage in them. But then there are probably swathes of Unilever that doesn't have the in-depth understanding of them, but it's kind of because they're kind of constantly being talked about, we'll constantly increase the engagement as we go. And also people will know about them from outside work. They're pretty well known, so we don't see it as kind of something that's we've got to do because they're the only time people hear about them. There's plenty of other routes to understanding them.
Can I ask you one more? Because I just realized and I overlooked it. If it's possible to give a 1-minute answer to David Gardner's question about just the practical steps you're taking to cascade the SDGs and/or the compass down your supply chain. I know that's not a 1-minute question, but if you could just give us a teaser, and maybe we'll catch you again on another occasion.
I think our relationships with supply chains are partnerships, and there's ongoing conversations. So the compass, when we launched that, they were all invited to the launch, and then there's ongoing kind of conversations about what it means, because some of the commitments are beyond our four walls, and we want to work with them to delivering them. So, and again, there's a big ambition, and we don't always know how to do everything, and so it's working with our partners, collaboratively to really make it happen.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. We can't express enough our appreciation for you giving your time today to share the Unilever experience and the leadership that you and your company have been demonstrating in this field. Sorry you have to go, but it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks, Stephen. Thank you, everyone, for having me. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Those of you whose questions didn't get answered, please don't panic. We are going to have some more Q&A in just a little while. And many of the questions that left, I think, probably sit well with Jess and I. So Jess, back to you. I think we have a couple more slides, and then we'll do some more Q&A in just a little while. Thanks, everyone.
Absolutely, thanks, Steve. And Great, if we can just get the slides back up again, brilliant. So really insightful hearing from Jonathan, and great to hear from an example of a company that I guess is really leading in the way. And we just wanted to take 5 or 10 minutes to, I guess, take a little bit of a step back and look generally, how is business doing on the agenda? Obviously, Unilever have been leading for a long time, but really looking at, in general, how is business progressing against the SDGs? So before we do that, we've got another couple of questions for you. And I'm just going to figure out how to relaunch the second poll. There we go. Hopefully that's working now. And so really simple yes, no questions, or not sure if that's your answer. First question, is your organization taking actions to achieve the SDGs? And that can be however big or however little they are. And the second question, do you think your organization's targets are sufficiently ambitious to achieve the SDGs? And the reason I've used targets there rather than actions is that perhaps you're not taking actions right now, but you've got targets or plans in the future to be addressing some of those issues. So just a simple yes, no question, and I'll give you about another 10 seconds or so to answer those if you've not had a chance already. Okay, a few more answers coming in. I'll give you 5 more seconds. Okay, I'm going to end the polling now. So fantastic. Looks like 90% of people on the call today are all taking actions to achieve the SDGs, which is fantastic to hear. Really interesting, though, that 40% of you don't think that your organization's targets are sufficiently ambitious to achieve the SDGs. We've got about 30% that do, another about 30% that aren't sure. And that's really interesting and going to lead nicely into our next slide. So how is business doing on advancing this agenda? The good news is that we're seeing a lot of engagement. You know, you can see it from our poll here. A lot of engagement by businesses across the SDGs. But I think the really critical thing here is that there is a bit of a performance gap between the action that businesses are taking right now and the global and societal needs defined by the SDGs. And on the screen here, you can see some research which was done globally. And globally, there was about 81% of companies that were found to take action to support the goals, but only 39%. And that matches quite closely to this quick poll that we've done here. Only 39% of companies have targets that they think are sufficiently ambitious or science-based or aligned to societal needs to be able to achieve those by 2030. And a lot of companies report that the biggest challenge they face is embedding the goals deeply in their operations, strategies, and value chains. Next slide, please. So it's really clear that we need to be more ambitious, go deeper with our implementation, and speed up our efforts. And there's just a quote here on the slide from the UN Secretary General that says it's abundantly clear that a much deeper, faster, and more ambitious response is needed to unleash the social and economic transformation needed to achieve our 2030 goals. So throughout the rest of this webinar series, we're going to be hearing from a number of businesses, just like Jonathan this morning, who will be sharing their own case studies and sustainability journeys of how they're actually been engaging with the SDGs, hopefully to provide a little bit of inspiration, but also to discuss how they're planning or how they are now raising their ambition levels to deliver the 2030 agenda and coming with their own practical tips and learnings of how we can do the same. We're also going to be highlighting some of the practical tools and resources that are out there that can help you with your own journey. And so I'd like to introduce 2 of those today. If we're going to go on the next slide. I mentioned right at the very beginning about the Relics SDG Resource Centre. And that centre showcases the latest in science, law, business, events, and more that can help drive forward the SDGs, drawing on content from across the whole of Relics, but also from key partners as well. It's a fantastic sort of content. I should say it's sort of free and online, accessible to all. And it includes articles, reports, legal practical guidance, if that's what you're looking for. There's tools, webinars, videos, all categorized by SDG and also tagged with relevant topics and region. If we can go on to the next slide, I've got an image that I took from the website yesterday, which is of their interactive news tracker. And this shows the global coverage of the SDGs. So you can see here the size of the bars indicates each SDG's share of voice, should we say, for a given week. So I pulled this yesterday. You can see already from this week, the biggest SDGs that are being talked about at the moment are gender equality. We've got goal 12 there, responsible consumption and production, climate action, there's a bit there of quality education. So really fascinating to see, and it searches over millions of articles published daily. I think across about 77,000 news sources in 7 languages. And you can use that to search for SDG news also by geography, so by region, country, state and province. And I can see that Claire shared the link in the chat, so you can go and have explore it for yourself and see what it's got to offer. The second resource that I wanted to share today is the Blueprint for Business Leadership on the SDGs. And this is an online site to encourage you to think in innovative, creative and ambitious ways about how your company can become sustainability leaders. So for each SDG, it challenges organizations to think critically about 5 leadership qualities. And I've got an image that will be coming up on the screen soon, which I've taken from goal 5 as an example. And those 5 leadership qualities that identifies are intentional, ambitious, consistent, collaborative and accountable. And for each SDG, it encourages you to think about how you can apply those leadership qualities to your strategy in support of the achievement of the SDGs. The blueprint also includes a number of business actions. And again, I've got an example on the screen. Illustrative examples of business practices that are leading in today's context and can help you achieve that particular SDG. And this example is taken from goal 5, which is gender equality. And my final image, it also highlights some of the ways that these actions can then contribute to the other goals. So 2, I think, fantastic resources there for great for content, but also for inspiration on how you can then start to be looking at how you can raise your level of ambition and step up your game. I think we'll leave it there. I know we've got about 10-15 more minutes and there's lots more questions. So Steve, perhaps I'll invite you at this point to join back online and pick out some of those other questions that we wanted to answer.
Thanks, Jess. We'll do our best. We'll give some quick answers as much as we can. So starting at the top with Claire Nichols' question about how can small business measure their progress or contribution to the SDGs. I think it's important to recognize that the SDGs provide a comprehensive, holistic framework for creating the future we want. And there's lots that SMEs can do to contribute to that, whether you're branding it with SDGs or not. And I note that comprehensive compass slide from Jonathan didn't actually explicitly map everything to the SDGs, but the connections are still there. So when an SME is getting to 100% recycling and 0 waste to landfill, or when they have instituted, made themselves a living wage employer, or have instituted blind hiring practices to ensure that they're not discriminating in any of their human resources activities, or have gender balance in their management team, or have made a commitment to be net zero. These are all really important contributions to the SDGs, even if contributing to the SDGs wasn't necessarily the primary driver for taking those steps. So measuring is just as you would measure them now, ultimately. There is the Office for National Statistics in the UK is one of the leading data sources on SDG performance globally. They're doing an outstanding job. But just again, to bear in mind that those individual contributions are something I think it's really useful for even small companies to track and to be able to talk about, to motivate employees, to impress customers and investors, to know that you are actually making a real contribution. So I think measuring the contribution is critically important. Lots of reasons why you would want to do it. there really isn't a mechanism for transferring those contributions into a broader data pool, so that you know it's being counted. It's all part of the, the national metrics are what's really going to count. But I think you have to just know that everybody needs to make a contribution. By making that contribution, it flows through to the global. The next question: how do global economic metrics on assessing business growth, production, and therefore business success square with the demands of the SDGs? Year-on-year growth doesn't square with staying within the limits of the planet's carrying capacity. So I think there was another question, further down from Anonymous, about how we define sustainable growth. And I'm just going to say, this is a very challenging area, and we are planning a 2-day Global Goals Summit on the 20th and 21st of July. And the closing event in that summit is in fact going to be a formal debate on the question of growth. And does that whole concept of growth align with the spirit of the SDGs? And this is really challenging because there are strong arguments both. If you're coming from a more environmental perspective and you want to talk about planetary limits, growth looks like a problem. And promises of decoupling economic growth from environmental impact seem like we've not really been realizing that. But if you flip it and look at it from a more social perspective, someone who is currently trapped in poverty would be looking at growth as possibly their only way out of poverty. And I think there was a reference further down, about inequality and wealth. And that's absolutely right, that we need to correct inequality. But just politically and practically speaking, it would be much easier to lift people out of poverty by having growth and the benefits of that growth being unequally distributed in favor of poor people, than it will be to take wealth from rich people to equalize. And so we have a real challenge there, and we don't actually have an answer to that. So we certainly are encouraging as much as possible that decoupling of environmental impacts from growth. And I would say that's how we currently are defining sustainable growth that is built on respect for workers' rights, respect for human rights more generally in society, respect for the environment. And I do believe that is possible. We are seeing it. The best companies are building up their business models in a sustainable way, and we want to see more of that. Jess, are we for time? Is there time for another? Or are we?
Yep, there's definitely time for another one.
Are we going? I'm sorry, I should know this. Are we?
I think we can go for another 5 or maybe even 10 minutes.
Oh, fabulous. Okay. So moving right along. Joe Murphy asks, I'm often asked about the connection between SDGs and CSR. Lots of different questions arise. Do the SDG reporting tools replace CSR? How do they align, etc.? Would be interested in our position on that. So first, let me just distinguish between the Global Compact and our 10 principles that existed before the SDGs were created and will continue long after the SDGs have been achieved. The SDGs are goals. It is a framework. It is a tool. I would say the SDGs sit within the broader corporate sustainability / CSR agenda. And I think it's a very, very useful tool for any corporate sustainability department to use as a way of assessing materiality, assessing what are the important issues that they should be looking at, and within those issues, what are the most pressing aspects. And so important to look all the way down. And again, there's a question further down that talks about the goals. If you're looking, it's way down there. refers to some of the text of the goals that's on the icons. And I think this is why the exercise you did just at the beginning, where we did a deep dive into the one goal, it's absolutely critical when you want to engage around this SDGs agenda that you don't stop at the 17 goals and those little icons that say no poverty, zero hunger, the health and well-being. There's so much more critical granularity in the targets and the indicators. To really understand what's happening with the goals, it's absolutely vital to get down to that level, to understand what we're seeking to achieve here. So SDGs, I think, are just a central part, a very useful tool. Companies can be responsible and sustainable without making any reference to the SDGs. Our position is the SDGs are a common language that has been adopted by many leading companies, many leading civil society organizations, and every government in the world. So I think there is value in using that language in the work that you're doing and incorporating it into your CSR activities. I'm going to leave that there. Matthew's question about the government, I guess I couldn't agree more. I think there's a fantastically missed opportunity that our national government has not been more public about the extent to which the SDGs are influencing policy. I think it's a tremendously missed opportunity, because had they spoken out more forcefully to say we are incorporating these goals into policy, then that would have mobilized more action from both civil society and business to contribute to the goals. It's naive and widely recognized that no government is going to achieve these goals on their own. They need to mobilize key actors in society to get there. And just by signaling their commitment to this agenda more forcefully would do a world of good in moving things forward. Now, that said, there is quite a lot happening behind the scenes. In the departmental level planning within the government, that process that Jess referred to of the voluntary national review from 2019 did a lot to raise awareness within the government of the commitments that they had made, and they've been building on that ever since. There are great people working within the government to spread the word, to get greater engagement there in Whitehall, and I think we'll see more of that in the months and years ahead, hopefully very, very soon. Tarek's question is a tricky one, but I guess we have to respect the votes. So, I think it may just, we're getting closer, but one of the challenges that has always been around sustainability issues is that they tend to be longer term. Investments in sustainability at the level of a company do typically take some time to return. The costs of being unsustainable, absolutely true, are borne by individuals immediately. But from a business perspective, investments to correcting those things can take a little bit more time to deliver returns. So I think we really do need to work on metrics in this area, and certainly many people are working in that space. I saw a post from Worldwide Generation in the chat earlier, and I know they and many other organizations are working in that space to start capturing data in real time. And I think that's a really exciting direction, and I hope that we see more of that. Okay, I hope that helped. I'm not sure that I answered it quite properly. Corinne's question, where do businesses start with their contribution to the SDGs? My go-to response here is the SDG Compass, not the Unilever Compass, but www.sdgcompass.org. It's a very simple change process there it is in the chat. Thank you, Claire. for companies to adopt. It starts with getting to know, just being familiar with the goals, which we hopefully have helped you with a little bit today. Secondly, looking at your impacts up and down your value chain, both so upstream and downstream. Where are your impacts, both positive and negative? And that's where you need to start looking then at how do you mitigate those negative impacts, how do you amplify the positive ones, then set goals, and then integrate this into your company. And that's usually the trickiest one. But some of the leaders in this space are aligning executive remuneration with performance against sustainability goals. That's really I think that the fastest, most effective way to get that integration that we want to see. And then finally, be transparent and report on it. I trust that many people were inspired by what we heard from Unilever today. And I think that's a really perhaps overlooked role of reporting, is as a leader in this space, by getting out there publicly talking about the good work you're doing. I would expect there to be commercial benefits for that, but equally, you're helping set norms and benchmarks that are going to put pressure on your competitors to step up as well. And it's by reporting and being public and transparent in this space that we can move, the whole economy towards sustainability, by establishing this is the standard, and you're going to be out there, waving that flag. Joanna, your question is the one for the ages, so I don't really know quite where to point to. There are lots of work happening in this space. The Global Reporting Initiative provides some suggested indicators. The SDGs have indicators. I think in many cases they are imperfect. They tend to be backwards looking. I'm not sure that anybody yet has quite cracked, how do we measure the impact for respect for human rights on people's lives in any sort of quantifiable way. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to just, with more time, I think I flatter myself I could come up with a better answer, but I think we'll have to park that one for now. Jane, we sort of answered that one, I think, on the multi-stakeholder model, and I think I wouldn't want to speak for Jonathan, so I'm going to have to skip down to Matt's question. I think that's a really interesting one. The goals are extremely interconnected, and I think any attempt to disconnect them is flawed. I think that progress on one goal negatively impacting another is certainly possible and something we need to be conscious of, but I do think it does tend to be at the extremes. And I don't think we're doing so well on any goal just yet that we have to worry about that. But it's a totally valid example. And it's one that I've actually seen in real time, an energy company giving themselves a massive pat on the back for their progress on goal 7, and how, so that's, energy for all, and how that was improving the lives of people by giving them energy. So, kids could keep the lights on longer in developing countries and study into the night, and all of the positive impacts of energy, with no mention of goal 13 and the impact on climate change that their work was having. So that's probably the most obvious place. But there are other areas where, certainly water is very much in tension. We need it for populations, we need it for industry, we need it for agriculture. It needs to be shared out. Perhaps too much economic growth without sufficient attention to water is going to lead problems. So I think just that interconnectedness is noted. I think it's a helpful reminder that anybody should be looking at the goals holistically. That said, there's no expectation that every company works on every goal. I think it came up earlier, and again, materiality is really important. So, key, if you're going through the compass, identify the goals where you can have an impact and have an impact. And now I finally look at the time. So sorry, Jess. I've probably gone longer than I should.
Well, I think, Steve, you did a stellar job of getting through a lot of those questions. And I do apologise thank you so much for all of your questions. And I apologise to the ones we didn't get to. I'm just having a quick scan through, and I can see there's more questions about reporting, more questions about how you engage with stakeholders. So I guess now is the best time really for me to tell you about the next events coming up in our webinar. And I've got a slide for you which shares some of the dates and the titles of those. So we are going to be working our way through some of those stages that Steve mentioned in the SDG Compass, as well as sharing more tools like that and hearing from many, many more businesses. We've got Sky, we've got Tesco, WWF, Slaughter May, Relics, Arup, Relics. I think that's all of them I mentioned. All coming to talk about how they've been engaging with the SDGs and deepening the integration throughout their organisation. So in a couple of weeks' time, our next webinar is going to be looking at exactly that issue that Steve was talking about. How do you get down from the 17 goals to the ones that you're really having an impact on? So how do you work out your priorities and then set goals on them? The third webinar in the series, we'll be looking at some of those different areas where you can deepen implementation. I know people were talking about in the questions there, asking about stakeholder consultations and how you engage with people. So we'll be hearing from some businesses around that. And then the fourth webinar looking at how do you really amplify the actions that you're doing? So how do you report on the SDGs and build them into your corporate reporting processes? And how do you build external partnerships and develop trust amongst your stakeholders? So that's what's coming up. If you've not registered for them already, I can see that Claire has put the link in the chat there. So do head to our website and sign up to the next of our webinars. And that's not all the events that we've got going on. And we've got in the next slide just a bit of a snapshot of what we've got coming up over the next couple of months or so. We're going to be starting a Black Lives Matter in Business series. We did a really successful one last autumn, so we're going to be starting series number 2 just next week. So do sign up and join us for that. The first webinar is going to be all about ESG investing. We've got our 2-day Global Goals Summit that Steve mentioned, where we're going to be having our debate around sustainable growth, along with a number of other different workshops and webinars and some really inspirational sessions. So do save the date for that and visit our website to find out all of the links and registration for that. And I should also mention that we've got our UK-Norway Sustainable Finance Action Platform, which is looking at the finance objectives from COP26. So again, head to our website online, find out more information and sign up to join us. I think that's all for me. I just really like to say a big thank you to Jonathan, to Steve, and to all of the team. And thank you to Relics who are supporting the series. And without them, these important conversations couldn't take place. We have a very short survey that will pop up in your browser at the end of the session. So we'd really appreciate 1 minute of your time to give us your feedback. And we hope to see you at the next event. As I said, if you've not signed up already, please do head to our website and register. Don't forget to share your feedback. And we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks everyone for joining us and have a good day.
Bye-bye. Thank you.